Let me just bring on Guy Roche.
You know, the acoustics are good here, right? They're very good. I don't need the let me put it here. I project as well. Not quite as good as Bob. And thank you for the introduction, Bob. I tell you, when I think of my own legacy, yeah, the myth busting is important to me. But you're right. The way we kept our records, we kept them in a shoebox. The way we did our business when I first took the job in 1981 was embarrassing. I grew up in the state on the southern end, I'll admit it, but I live up here now. And it's unbelievable that the state government could keep their records that way, but they did. Some people, they didn't care anyway. The less records, the better, obviously. But I believe in accountability. I believe in historical continuity. I believe that the past dictates the present, suggests the future. And them that have access to information, if you don't have the money, have the information, sometimes you're going to win some of those battles. And I have in litigation and in some other settings. So thank you, Bob. Much appreciated. How many people have seen me entertain before? Perform? Oh, I love you, all my fans. I'll be signing autographs with my picture. It's wonderful. Well, if you know something about my background, I not only was state archivist for 28 years and 32 years with the state of Nevada, but I've done a lot of things with television, radio, newspapers. I tried to get the message out. The past is important. The truth matters. I was thinking about when Bob was introducing me, some of the jokes I sometimes share before I get into the meat of my talk. Does anybody know the difference between a liar and I'll say BSer, in case I might offend anybody. Anybody know the difference between a liar and a BSer? Raise your hand. Okay. A liar knows what the truth is and a BSer doesn't care. Okay? There's a fundamental difference. Again, a liar essentially is aware of the fact of what the truth is. A person who's BSing, generally the more alcohol the better. You know, it's storytelling. You know, if it wasn't true, it should have been, right? Right? Don't let the facts get in the way of a good story. There's a lot of people. All of that's fine if you're in the entertainment business. But if you're in the history business, okay, that shouldn't be getting confused. And unfortunately, it gets very confused. It gets confused among journalists. It gets confused in textbooks. It gets confused by politicians who confuse us all the time because it pays to confuse people in order to get their votes. But trying to get at the truth is what I'm trying to do. I've been asked to do that with this story. I'm going to share one other joke that I was introduced at a Sunrise Rotary in Reno at the Siena. An attorney shared it with me, and he was actually making fun a little bit of his own profession. And he said, I'll warm up the group with this because it really captures what you stand for. Okay, why you go out and seek the truth as much as it can be known. There's a group, they're doing a survey of 3 occupations. And they're going to ask one question. So they go to the office of the mathematician, and they ask the mathematician, we're doing a survey of 3 occupations, asking one question. What is 1 and 1? And the mathematician says, 2, of course. Is this some kind of joke? And then they go next door to the economist, And they asked the economist the same question, doing a survey, 3 occupations was 1 and 1. He says, "You've got to be kidding. It's 2. Well, the third office is the office of the attorney. They knock on the door of the attorney and they say, survey group, we're surveying 3 occupations, we're asking one question. What is 1 and 1? The attorney looks around and says, come in here. Shut the door, sit down. What do you want it to be? Right? Give you what you want. Anyway, what I'm told that I need to give you today in this presentation, again, I'm flattered to see so many of you in the chairs that kept coming up, is about one of my stories that relates to Hank Monk and Horace Greeley. I'm going to take off my glasses because it helps me. I call it Riding High, Hank Monk and Horace Greeley. Now, prior to your coming here and you're seeing the promotion for tonight's talk, how many of you had heard of Hank Monk? Pretty good. How many knew him personally? Oh, okay. Just checking. How about Horace Greeley? That's impressive. I think Bob and I were betting there would be a lot less hands going up. And these 2 men coming together on July 30th, 1859. That is the day we're going to talk about, one day, and then the significance of that day, putting all of this in context and what it meant for these 2 men. Now, many of you who heard of Horace Greeley, you probably heard of the phrase he was supposed to have coined, right? Go West, young man. Okay. How many people believe that to be true? You came west? Okay. Well, the fact of the matter is, and people have extensively studied this phrase, and he did not coin the phrase. He did not say that. Now, how many people are disappointed? Because you believe that, right? I mean, you've heard it for what? All your lives, all your adult lives, years and years and years. Well, what did he say then? And when did he say it? And how did he get confused with people who also allegedly said similar things? Here's the phrase, or phrases, he used them twice. 1841. He had established the New York Tribune. He was from New Hampshire, young man, made his way ultimately to New York City, a good writer, amassed some capital, and ended up building really one of the greatest newspapers of its time up to and shortly after the Civil War, the New York Tribune. And he had a lot of things to say. He would be considered a liberal in his time, probably a liberal in this time, and supporting women's rights. Conservatives didn't believe in women's rights back then. That was something they opposed. He believed in abolition. Conservatives didn't believe in abolition at that time. They supported chattel slavery. So he was popular in some circles and unpopular in other circles. Now, in 1841, he makes some statements. Here's what he said. We have the quotes. This is what he said about on going west. Quote, "Do not lounge in the cities. There is room and health in the country, away from the crowds of idlers and imbeciles. Go west before you're fitted for no life but that of the factory." Now, he said that in the Tribune in 1841. Here's something else he said in the same year. "If you have no family or friends to aid you, turn your face to the great west, and there build up your home and fortune." Does that sound like go west, young man? But it's not go west, young man, right? Clearly he had an interest in the west. But this is about embellishment, okay? It's kind of like if I started go west, young man here, and go west, young man here, and see what we got in the middle. Things got distorted and out of context. He admitted he never said go west, young man, okay? He said, I didn't coin that phrase. He said, I certainly supported people looking at the west for opportunity. Now here's where he arrived at. I got to share this with you. In 1871, 30 years later, and he's now been out west. He came out in 1859. Does anybody know why he came out here, what his principal interest was? What was he promoting? Does anybody know? Well, he's definitely on a speaking tour, of course. He wants a transcontinental railroad. And he's promoting a transcontinental railroad principally through the central route, because that's the route he took out this way. Okay? And so he is coming out west for the first time. And of course, upon seeing that west in 1859, this is he's in Utah, the Great Salt Lake Desert, overland journey. He says, "This desolation seems irredeemable." Okay? But in 1871, shortly before his death in 1872, he reached another conclusion. This Daniel Boone business is just about played out. Pretty funny, right? The West was changing. In fact, in 1841, his West was really the Missouri, Illinois, Wisconsin, Minnesota, that West. California was still under Mexican control. Nothing much was happening. Certainly the Great Gold Rush wouldn't begin until 1848-49. So the fact is, on the myths, he never said, "Go west, young man." Now there's debate over who said it. And when another editor in 1859 in an Indiana newspaper, and other people saying we can't find that in all his newspapers. So it's still being debated. But in setting the record straight, our man Horace Greeley did not use that phrase, but clearly, for a period of his life, promoted going to what is now we probably consider our Midwest. Okay, the other thing, and I'll talk about it, putting all this in context, this unbelievable ride of July 30th, 1859, is a belief, and this did dog him for his whole career, the belief that it cost him the election. We're in an election year. People knew that he ran for President of the United States in 1872, right, against Ulysses Simpson Grant, one of the most honest presidents we ever had. Right? He'd probably go down in the bottom 10. A wonderful war hero, but war heroes don't necessarily make good presidents. And there were people in his cabinet that compromised the heck out of him. His appointments were pretty poor, and the credit Beaubier scandal. But at the time, Horace Greeley thought he could win that election. Of course, he himself was, again, rather controversial in terms of supporting utopian experiments, Charles Fourier out of France, and utopian colonies. He had a lot of ideas that were considered exotic, and he was considered more eccentric as he grew older. So let's focus then on this ride. And this man, Hank Monk, who's going to be an obscure figure, but this ride will change his life forever. Okay, and Horace Greeley is going to be the person who's first going to tell the world, but then everybody's going to tell the world, and it's going to be repeated over and over and over again. The book, Roughing It. Okay, show of hands. Roughing It. Good. You are now qualified as a combatant. Put your hand on the book. This is one of, I would argue, the Bibles of Chronicles of the West. I won't call it history. There's too much exaggeration and BS in the book. Okay, but it's a great book to capture the color and the flavor of what Mark Twain was experiencing in Nevada Territory and in California, and right at the end when he goes to the Sandwich Islands and Hawaii. In chapter 20, this book talks about this ride, or his Mark Twain's version of it. Obviously, he wasn't there to witness it, but he heard it very soon after he came to Nevada Territory in 1861. The ride was in 1859. Does everybody know when this book was published? The same year that Horace Greeley was running for president, 1872. Okay, so the timing reminded the American public of this incident, resurrected it after it had first been shared by Horace Greeley in his New York Tribune shortly after the ride, and then picked up by Mark Twain, Artemus Ward, and repeated ad nauseum. And that's what we'll capture here. I want to share this with you in this chapter because, well, let me read it to you. So now he's this is Twain himself, actually still using the name Sam Clemens. He's on a stagecoach, and he's talking to somebody. He says, "I was sitting with the driver, and he said," of the stagecoach, "I can tell you a most laughable thing indeed. If you would like to listen to it, Horace Greeley went over this road once. When he was leaving Carson City, he told driver Hank Monk that he had an engagement to lecture at Placerville and was very anxious to get through quick. Hank Monk cracked his whip and started off at an awful pace. The coach bounced up and down in such a terrific way that it jolted the buttons all off Horace's coat, and finally shot his head clean through the roof of the stage. And then he yelled at Hank Monk and begged him to go easier. Said he wasn't in as much of a hurry as he was a while ago. But Hank Monk said, "Keep your seat, Horace, and I'll get you there on time." And you bet you he did too, what was left of him. Okay. Now, that story in this chapter is repeated, I think, 5 times. And what Twain was doing in his sarcastic way is saying, that's how many times I was hearing the story. It was overwhelming. Everybody was constantly consumed with sharing this story. And he wanted to capture that redundancy by repeating it in the chapter. Okay, now, do you think this is a history of what really happened on that ride? No, this is Mark Twain. Okay, Mark Twain. Well, you know, he never let the facts get in the way of a good story, that's for sure. Okay, and he had some great stories. But you need to understand what the story is and what the reality is. That's what I do. I'm CSI Carson City. I'm a forensic historian. So I'm constantly looking at the body of literature and trying to understand, what do I have in front of me here? Okay, what happens? Let's go to what happens. Because I want to contrast this story and some others with what really happened. First of all, where did they meet up? Okay, I hear it says Carson City. I've tried to determine, we didn't have any, I'm trying to think of the territorial enterprise. I don't think it was being published yet, and if it was, I think there are no extant issues. The idea is to try to track what happened on this ride by newspapers of the time. We had to rely on other authorities. I'm not sure if it was Carson City. It appears to be in Carson Valley, perhaps in Genoa or immediately outside Genoa at a station, that he, in the morning of July 30th, 1859, Horace Greeley wants to be in Placerville by 5 p.m. Okay, so he's got to get on that route. And what is the route? Does anybody know the route that he took? Anybody have any idea what that route was? Go ahead.
He went around Foothill all the way out, and then over Carson Pass area?
Not Carson.
Or did they cut back around?
Come back around Luther to Johnson. Okay, that was the route that was taken. Now, I read accounts by some people who considered historians said, well, they went up Kingsbury Grade in 1859. If you know anything about the condition of Kingsbury Grade in 1859, you could not take a stagecoach up that particular route. There would be improvements later, but not that route. So essentially, in and around in Genoa, we can be sure they met up, you know, down, you say the immigrant route through the Carson River Canyon, up Luther, Myers Grade, over the top. Now, most of that ride, that initial ride, was at a reasonably normal pace. Here's where things got crazy. Okay, they're over Luther, they go into Lake Valley, they go over, you know, the summit. They get to Strawberry. Everybody been on Highway 50? Okay, they get to Strawberry, and at that point, Horace Greeley is just not sure they're going to get to Placerville by 5 p.m. Okay? Now, you may not know this. This was his last opportunity to communicate with the party he was going to meet in Placerville by telegraph. Now, a lot of people don't realize that the telegraph, which undid the Pony Express, right, didn't go from just east to west. What did it do? It went like this. So, by 1859, there was telegraph communications from essentially San Francisco all the way through Strawberry into Genoa, and they had recently connected in Carson City. The rest of the telegraph was coming in the other direction, just like the railroad did. So the point being is, in this early period, Genoa was connected to San Francisco. They knew things within so many minutes. A lot of people don't understand that. They always thought everything went east to west, right? Wasn't that your general perception? Right? You knew the railroads met in Promontory, Utah. Well, the same thing is the telegraph met, I think in eastern Nevada. Two sides met over there. So here he is. He's worried when he gets to Strawberry. Hey, I'm going to tell these guys I'm going to make it. And they're going to have a party waiting for him outside Placerville to pick him up. And he says, can you get me there on time? And Hank Monk, that's when he guarantees him, I'm going to get you there on time. So that ride, the craziness ride, is from Strawberry, okay? It's from Strawberry, not from Carson Valley. It didn't start crazy all the way up there. From Strawberry to about 10 miles east of Placerville, about 40 miles. 40 miles of craziness, okay? And he was going pretty much full tilt. And if you see some of the graphics in books, it does use Mark Twain's image of Horace Greeley's head coming out the stagecoach and out one side and out the other, etc. So Horace Greeley was delighted when they got to the other side. The people from Placerville met him at a station, again about 10 miles outside Placerville, picked him up. Hank Monk went on ahead with the stagecoach, got there before, okay, the entourage that had picked him up, and Horace Greeley bought him the best suit he could find in Placerville for getting him there on time, okay. Then what he did is he wrote the story, and he sent it by mail back to New York, and it was published in the New York Tribune within a few short weeks. I believe it was by about late August or early September, something like that. That was the first time that the world heard about it. And Horace Greeley was proud of it and had his version. Then Hank Monk got to talking. Okay. And everybody started interviewing Hank Monk. Hank Monk had another story. Horace looked more heroic in his own story. Hank Monk, since he talked about the fear and the anxiety and everything that he encountered, and constantly reminding him, I will get you there on time. And Horace Greeley did want him to slow down at a certain point. He just couldn't handle it anymore. And he says, no, I'm going to keep my promise. And they did. They talked about the coach actually getting up on two wheels in some situations and navigating some pretty tough straits. Then, the stories become part of the popular lore and culture. Samuel Clemens hears them. He does a few things. And a fellow by the name of Artemus Ward, he actually publishes the account after one of his tours. And then a member of the House of Representatives in 1866 introduced it into the Congressional Record as an attack upon Horace Greeley, that he really wasn't a courageous man, but more of a coward. So there was stigma at times placed around this ride that this really showed this tin-horn Easterner really didn't have the spine that you might need, for a leadership position, perhaps even in the President of the United States. But to suggest that in this race in 1872, that was the reason why Horace Greeley, lost the race, is clearly an exaggeration. Let me just read this. While Greeley tried to disassociate himself from Monk and the unflattering story, it continued to dog him right up to the 1872 presidential election. Some writers have suggested that the story may have actually cost him the election. In truth, historians have noted that Greeley was a long-standing controversial figure and savagely satirized by cartoonist Thomas Nast, a very, very famous early cartoonist, independent of the exaggerated story surrounding his stagecoach ride in 1859. Essentially, his stand on the major issues of the day led to his resounding defeat in the presidential election. Financial loss in the famous diamond mine swindle, and then his sickly wife died. He was overwhelmed by all the turn of events, and he was considered America's premier social gadfly. He sank into severe depression. He died before the electoral votes were cast. So technically, we didn't even have a living candidate at that point. He'd lost in terms of in the voting in the jurisdictions that had supported him. One of the rare times in our history, I don't know if it's the only time, it's certainly one of the rare times in our history, that the loser died before the electors could cast their votes in the respective states at the time. Okay, so I don't know what time it is. I don't know if I can fill a full hour here. How far did I get on time here? About a half an hour. Now, at this point in time, you can ask me more questions about this event, which I think is one of the high-profile events in our part of the world. And with Hank Monk, maybe I should finish up. What happened to Hank, right? Because ultimately, Hank became much bigger than Horace Greeley, in my opinion, particularly in the western United States. His reputation followed him everywhere. Of course, he constantly told everybody about the Horace Greeley story. It was always a reminder of one of the most colorful periods that really launched him into the American history and left him that legacy. But he continued to run stagecoaches. In 1860, I went to the 1860 U.S. Census. I wanted to see where he lived. He had not moved to Carson City yet. He was still living outside Classroom. But I found, using the city directories by 1862 and also using deeds and assessment rolls, I found him there by 1862. He's living in Carson City. Okay, and believe it or not, his house is still there. Ah, yes. Where is the house? And the house, who knows their way around Carson City? Most everybody? West 5th Street. You know where the Ormsby house is here? Okay, and Jack's Bar? Yeah. Now, behind it, they tore down that little old motel, right?
Yeah.
Go right across the street, due west. That house on the corner, which will be the northwest corner, that was Hank Monk's house. Okay, and it's not, there's no marker, it's not on the National Register, it's not on the State Register, nothing has been done as far as I know to designate it. How do I know it's Hank Monk's house? Again, the deed books and the assessment rolls. He's paying taxes every year on that property. Okay, so he died in Carson City. Anybody been to Lone Mountain Cemetery? Anybody trying to look at Hank Monk's grave up there? You'll find it. And if you can't find it, talk to the sexton.
Did he marry at all?
No, to the best of my knowledge, he was never married.
So he had no one to leave the property to?
I don't, as far as the disposition of his estate, I don't know if he died intestate or if there was other disposition on the property. So I don't know the chain of title at that point in time. So I can't help you with that.
Did he build the house?
I don't know that either. I just knew at a certain point in time, I've got the year. Hank Monk owns that property, paying taxes on that property is the description of the property. So whether he had it built for him or bought, I don't know. That's also difficult unless you have a newspaper account that's noting that. The deed is not going to tell you that. Those of you, all you good research in genealogists, etc. The assessment roll is not going to tell you that.
Did he own it when he died?
To the best of my knowledge, I tracked the deeds and the assessment rolls, and he still owned it in 1883 when he died. So something had happened. I've never researched what was the disposition of the house. Clearly, the next assessment roll, given the physical lot and block description, you can find out who the next owner is. But how the owner acquired the property would require additional. We're probably going to the district court and seeing, one, if there was a will, or if he died intestate, looking at the probate records. There's a way to do it. I just haven't done it. Okay.
How old was he when he died and where did he die?
He died essentially of old age, broken down. Now, let me see if I can just find the year. Because he was from New York State, where I went to school. I went to school upstate in Syracuse. He was up near the Canadian border. Bear with me. I think I've got this someplace. He was younger than Horace Greeley. Horace Greeley was born in 1811 in New Hampshire. And I am not putting it up better. But, sorry.
It seems interesting to me that he would be born back east and then come out here to be a stagecoach driver.
He was driving stage in New York State.
Oh.
Okay, his stagecoach career started, do people know where Messina area is up there? Okay, way north. I'm talking near the St. Lawrence River. He wanted to drive stage early in his life. He was driving stage there. He came to California in 1850, a year after the Great Rush to California, and he was driving stage in the Sacramento area, Sacramento, Placerville, etc., and then jumped over on this side by the 1860s, was driving stage in different areas. As the railroads built in, his routes became shorter, but he kept going essentially back and forth from Carson City to Glenbrook until shortly before he died. There was a certain point in time he just couldn't drive the stage anymore. His hands, his back, everything was so beat up. I think by 1881, 82. So within the last couple of years of his life, he stopped driving the stage. Now, here's an interesting piece, though. In 1903, I found this item, and this is in online trusted sources. So, you got to navigate this like a minefield in Afghanistan. IUDs everywhere. But there was a fellow by the name of James A. Yerington. This was Henry Marvin Yerington's son. And in St. Louis, they were going to honor at the World's Fair. They were going to honor Hank Monk in 1903. Another thing they were doing, I don't know if you know, but the Ferris wheel. Okay. Yeah, this valley, right? It had been moved from Chicago to St. Louis, and it was on display at this World's Fair. Later demolished in 1906. That was where it was demolished in St. Louis. So here's this thing about Hank Monk, and I'm trying to. This is Twain. This announcement brings a weight of years down upon my head. These two names carry me back 32 years, Hank Monk and Yerington. I think I was present when the watch was given Monk. I don't know if you've ever heard of that. I think, is it Hank Monk's watch at the State Museum? Does everybody know that? I'll have to ask Bob Nyland. But he was given a watch and quite famous. Okay. He spent his early years driving a stage between Wellington and Messina in New York. George A. Monk, the brother of the famous stage driver, now lives in Gouverneur, New York, and his sister, Mrs. R.N. Kellogg, lives in Hartford, Connecticut. You probably met her there. He had a house there. But George A. Monk has a number of relics that he will loan Mr. Yerington, and they will be added to the World's Fair collection. So they were bringing all these different things to bear. And Bob, you mentioned, again, at the Mormon Station Museum, we have purportedly his gloves.
Yeah. In fact, we have a Nevada State Ranger here. Why don't you stand up and tell us about it?
Share the
I
wealth.
don't wear brown right now. I'm in seasonal.
You're not in season?
Yeah, I'm out of season.
Oh, you're out of season.
She cycled out, huh?
Well, these
Anyways, the gloves were on the wall.
Yes.
Yes.
That's when they
His
were.
sweat is-
And there's a photograph, right, of Carson Valley Pioneers, and Hank Monk is among them.
He is
Correct?
in that photograph as well.
Yeah.
I mean, the idea
And
go ahead.
out front at the door
Yes.
is a sled that was purported to be his.
Everybody wants a piece of Hank Monk.
That's right.
But what does that say? He's been conferred iconic status. Okay? Hank Monk, in my opinion, is among the greatest stagecoach drivers in Western history and arguably in United States history. Not only for what he did here, you should read all the other stories. There are some biographies. Just go over to your Douglas County Public Library or State Library and Archives. Just put in Hank Monk and you'll get a number of hits. Some good books that researched his life. There's one other, in passing, a sidebar, there's one other stagecoach driver who I feel ranks very high, close to Hank Monk, maybe equal to him. Charlie Parkhurst. Anybody ever heard of Charlie Parkhurst? Who was Charlie Parkhurst?
Hank Monk said they shared the front one night. He didn't know she was a girl.
Post-mortem, Charlie Parkhurst, who drove stage all over NorCal and was believed to be an outstanding stagecoach driver. Post-mortem, preparing him for death, they were preparing her for death. She cross-dressed in order to hold that job. And I know you won't believe this, but one area of interest that I have is females cross-dressing to get occupational opportunities. This was not uncommon. This was not uncommon in the West. Women who wanted to work in the mine could get those salaries. Okay, I covered one in British Columbia. A woman who actually joined the union was able to go underground. Women were not allowed underground, but they didn't know she was a woman. And it took a while before she was discovered to be a woman. That's how she was able to get that job. And again, not going too far afield, I served on the advisory committee on the records of Congress. I was appointed to do that. Very prestigious appointment, working with the National Archives, the Archives of the United States, the Senate Historian, House Historian, Senate Secretary, House Clerk, etc., other 5 appointees by the other leadership of Congress. And I was asked to go on a tour of the National Archives and where they keep the congressional records. They had a pension record that they shared with us that day. Okay, Civil War pension record. And why that was meaningful is the person who was applying for the pension was a soldier who had posed female, who had posed as a man. And there were affidavits in there saying, yeah, I worked with George, oh, God, I really liked him. We didn't know George was James, Georgette, yeah. Amazing, just amazing to read this, and then finding out that there were perhaps 30 to 40 other women that did that in the Union Army. Now, what was also interesting was this woman who was a soldier did get a pension, but didn't get a soldier's pension. Couldn't give it to him legally. What did they give her as a pension? Which one? Nurses. They were a nurse's pension. Okay? So, back to stagecoach drivers and Hank Monk's competition. Historically, a woman, nonetheless. So I thought you might enjoy that. That's really what I have to offer you on this. More questions? Yeah.
How many other people were in the stagecoach when it was being driven?
Good question. I don't know. Repeat it so we can hear it. Okay, repeat the question. The question was, in that stagecoach that left the Carson Valley and went to Pleasantville, who else was in the stagecoach? I don't know. I need to probably go back and read Horace Greeley's account to see if there was anybody else in that stagecoach besides him. Because obviously they had to go through the torture too, right? Okay, so there's someone else to tell the story. I don't have that answer.
How many votes did he get when he died?
Well, he got no votes, unless he never voted because he was dead. But he was overwhelmingly beat in terms of the popular vote. It was a decisive victory over the Republican, which is Grant. He was actually a long-time Republican, but he got the nomination. He was called the Liberal Republican, so he joined the Democrats and beat Grant. It's like politics today. You need a scorecard to tell who the players are. Okay, now, I have a question here. Yeah.
Now, Hank Monk also drove some other famous people that I've encountered that information.
That's true.
Like General Sherman, and I think, is it Rutherford and Hayes?
All that's true. Okay. That's good.
That's what I thought. Is it true?
It's true. Hank Monk, in the route between Glenbrook and Carson City, okay, anybody going that route would be on Hank Monk's stage. When Ulysses Simpson Grant, now former President Grant, was completing his world tour with his wife and son, they, coming through Asia, they came to California. They were in Tahoe City. They came by steamer to Glenbrook. They got on Bliss's little wood train, came up to Spooner, the summit, and that's where Hank Monk picked them up and took them into Carson City. So he was the stagecoach driver for former President Ulysses Simpson Grant. That was 1879. September 5th, if my memory serves me correctly. And in 1880, the first sitting president of the United States to ever come to the West, Rutherford B. Hayes, on his route to California, Hank Monk picked him up in Carson City. He had come by train and Central Pacific to Reno, and then the V&T to Carson, up to the Comstock, V&T back to Carson. Hank Monk took him up to Spooner Summit. They took the little wood train down to Glenbrook, and the Meteor across to Tahoe City, another stage to the Central Pacific, and on into Sacramento and San Francisco. So the answer is yes, Hank Monk did do that. There were a lot of people, and those among them that found Hank Monk driving. I'd never read stories that Hank Monk drove them crazy. Yes,
How old was Hank Monk when he died?
same
And
question.
did Sharkey have something to do with his headstone in Lone Mountain Cemetery or moving his?
I don't have that answer. Everybody knows who Sharkey is, right, from around here, Sharkey Begovic?
Sharkey did make a headstone, hang or plaque, and it does say so that Sharkey donated on the plaque.
On the plaque at Lone Mountain? Okay, so that can be verified, and you live there, so I expect to see you at the cemetery tomorrow.
I'll be there exactly where he's buried.
You know precisely where he's buried?
Yeah, if you go to, he's kind of towards Rube Street, kind of towards, like in the open dirt area more.
On the west side of the cemetery?
Yeah.
I'll show you.
Kind of by, not too far from the Yarrington plot in that area.
And how
Okay.
old was he when he died?
Yeah, well, that question's been asked twice now.
Guy
We trying.
born March 24th, 1826.
In Waddington, New York, right? I assume you have your BlackBerry or something out
Yeah,
there.
Waddington, New York.
Waddington, New York,
Yeah,
right? Yeah,
He
okay.
died
1883, one day.
February 28th, 1883.
Okay, let's do the math. Everybody, get out your calculator. Everybody got an abacus? Or a slide rule? We work with this? What does that make?
57.
57. A relatively young man. But if you read the descriptions of him, by the latter 1870s, early 1880s, he's had some wrecks. Okay, he's having a hard time controlling the horses with his hands. He's declining. He doesn't want to give it up, but he realizes he's lived a hard life, and I believe certainly by 1882, perhaps by 1881, he had to give it up. He just couldn't do it anymore. So he, again, a relatively young man, of course, to Horace Greeley, born in 1811, 1872, which is 61. A year I'll be. Nice. But, okay. Question way in the back, looks like it's Bob.
I just comment, 10 years before that, the average age of death for a male was 47. So he did pretty well.
Yeah, by the mortality rates at that time. Yeah, we're all lucky to be here, folks. Go ahead and congratulate each other. Let's leave it open for any other questions as well. I'm willing
I would
to.
like to have a guess of how far they travel from Genoa to Placerville, maybe in 12 hours, 5 to 5. I was trying to calculate how fast they were going, like average mile per hour.
Yeah,
That's-
it was early morning, whatever that is. He arrived before 5. So we're talking about 10 hours approximately en route. Now, does anybody want to hazard a guess? I gave you the route. How many miles that route might be? Is it over 100 miles or no? Well, okay, remember, you're going to go, what's that?
I think it's a lot, just a little bit.
A little bit less than 100 miles. We'll use Genoa as our starting point. Again, going down the valley, right, and through Woodford and the Carson River Valley, up around Luther, up top to the lake, over the summit and down. So a little less. So what about 10 miles an hour?
Yeah, that's fast.
That's fast, given the nature of those roads back then. All of that, plus, I believe at least in Strawberry there was a horse change. Okay. Again, all of this is interesting in terms of the river crossings and dynamics, horse changes. Strawberry was a very important point normally, and obviously became even bigger under these circumstances, given the imperative that Horace Greeley felt he had, and that he wanted to wire the people in Placerville, I will be there for the 5 o'clock presentation. Yes?
Guy, earlier in your talk, you used a word that I know we've all heard before, but apparently I have no idea where it came from. Tin horn.
Oh, tin horn. The etymology of the word tin horn. Well, you and me, who's got that BlackBerry back there? See what you get for tin horn? No, I don't know. Obviously, we know from all the westerns that we watched, okay, that was somebody, that was an Easterner. That was somebody who didn't know their way around. Okay, a green horn, a tin horn. But I'm not sure with a tin, green I get, green is like, right? Fresh. But tin, I'm not sure, other than perhaps in the Wizard of Oz. So, I wish I knew. Phrases are interesting, and the kinds of things that we use and ask ourselves, where did that come from anyway? I use it all the time, but what really does it mean, at least in terms of how did it start? So, as you can see, I can't answer all your questions, but I never pretended to be omniscient, omnipresent, and an omnivore. Yes.
Do you know how much a fare was from Carson to Placerville? How much it cost?
No. These are all good questions, but I'll be the first to admit, I am not a stagecoach expert. What I wanted to do was understand what was the truth in this story and what wasn't the truth in this story. But there are people, the railroad type's amazing, with how they know so much about railroads, and the bolts and the colors and the rest of it. I suspect we could find those stagecoach OCDs as well. The ones that, but I'm not one of those, so I can't answer your question. But I can try to answer other Nevada-related questions. Yeah.
This is Hank Monk related. The Hank Monk Schottish? What do you know about that?
What I know about it,
About what?
okay, the Hank Monk Schottish is, well, it's an arrangement
Right.
that was done by, what's his name? The family still is in Carson City. Meter, the Meter family. You know John, right? I think it was his grandfather or something. And it was done after I think Hank Monk had died to honor him. Okay? So there's actually music. In fact, the Bugleys. Do you know the Bugleys in Carson City? They've done something. What's the male? David. Talk to David. David has immersed. He's OCD about this.
He would actually have a copy of it.
He has a copy of it. And it's interesting. I've seen that. And they have a real nice illustration of Hank Monk's stage and the rest of that. And that's another thing in St. Louis. They said they had found the stage, and they took it to St. Louis for the World's Fair in 1903. So Hank Monk's legend, I would argue, has been sustained. Will it be sustained? I don't know. You know, think about this. Look around. Is there anybody in this audience under 40? Well, what I'm seeing in a lot of things, you know, in terms of what our shared culture is and how a lot of things have been transmitted, particularly the West, frontier, right, Westerns, all the rest of that. Young people today really aren't into Westerns. They aren't into the West. When I go to a class of elementary school kids and I start talking about Wyatt Earp and start looking at who's Wyatt Earp? Okay? The continuity of what we grew up with in the 1950s and 60s and, you know, all the different shows from Clint Eastwood, Rowdy Yates, and Rawhide, and Ward One, and Wagon Train, you know, all the different things that we saw. How long is anything sustained unless each generation is introduced to it again and embraces it again and then passes it on to the next one? That's including values, too, by the way. Good values. All right? And what I'm seeing is, in a lot of areas, people have asked me, well, what keeps it going? I says, well, what keeps it going is people continue to perhaps adore. Marilyn Monroe will be sustained. Marilyn Monroe seems to be holding up. Clark Gable is already starting to decline. Okay? And I see this with my analysis of the misfits and who's remembered. You know, the Montgomery Clift people, got to be a lot older to remember Montgomery Clift or Thelma Ritter. God bless Eli Wallach. He lives in Brooklyn. He's 96. Still makes a few movies. I really enjoy him. But this idea of sustainability of pop culture, what continues to live in a culture, what continues to be transmitted in all the different ways so that, you know, our grandkids have the same shared reality that we do. And so as a public speaker, I find I have to profile my audience and not make the mistake or the assumption that when I say Beverly Hillbillies, or my wonderful friend, and she is a wonderful friend of mine, Dawn Wells, with Gilligan's Island, that they know that. If they know it, they've been watching the syndication reruns. God bless my daughter, who's 25. She's seen every episode of I Love Lucy. She loves Lucille Ball. We're going to go to Jamestown, New York, and see the museums. Okay, but does that, you follow me in all of this in terms of what we embrace and the assumption that these young people and where they're getting their information and what they think is important? And I would argue that the West or the Western does not carry the romance and excitement for young people that for most of us, right? Yes?
You want to tackle one on the Lincoln Highway? Over the years, it seems to have been like I-80, 50, back and forth.
I-80.
Is it politics or geography?
Okay. Lincoln, everybody ready for Lincoln Highway stuff?
Yeah, it starts in New York.
The Lincoln Highway, let me see if that starts in New York or Maryland. I mean, that's
I saw that special on history.
Did you? Yeah, well, I went
So
to...
this must have been left though in New York, where it started.
Okay, where did it start in New York? Okay, you didn't pay close enough attention. I did a production for PBS for the highway, 50 segment, the Lincoln Highway segment in Nevada, okay? And when you think I-80 coming in from Wendover, that was not the Lincoln Highway. Okay? That was the Victory Highway. It's called the Victory Highway. Now, it gets confusing, all right? The Lincoln Highway was a more central route and went through communities like Ely and Eureka and Austin and Fallon. But when you got to Leakville Junction, everybody know where that is? Ragtown, Leakville Junction. What they did to satisfy kind of the political dynamics of the people in Reno and the people in Carson City is they set up two trails, the Pioneer Trail and there's another one. And so you had two routes. So Highway 50 was the Lincoln Highway through Carson City, and Highway 50A through Fernley, okay, and then on into Reno was also considered the Lincoln Highway, although it was contemporaneously with the Victory Highway. Then there was a connector through Washoe Valley, and that was called the Lincoln Highway Connector. Okay, all of these are to satisfy constituencies in these small towns. Now, if you go up 50 and go up to the lake now, right around Zephyr Cove, and those houses down there, there's still some Lincoln Highway. You ever see that? It says Lincoln Highway in concrete. There's some right down there in that residence down there. Just you know where the lodge is? Yeah. There's a right-hand turn, and if you go down there, it says Lincoln Highway, and there's still one down there. Okay, that was considered the Lincoln Highway. Now, this other stretch. Okay, let me see what other little things. Okay, in 1919, there was someone who led a Army transport motor convoy. Does anybody know who was on that 1919 convoy? Eisenhower. Dwight Eisenhower. Exactly. Good. You're going to pass today. And I've seen the film. In fact, that was part of our production that we did with KMTV Channel 5, the Lincoln Experience. He stopped in Carson City. The route that he took at Leakville Junction, he took Highway 50 into Carson City. Okay, but after he left Carson City, which way did he go? What was the original route of the Lincoln Highway into the Carson Range? Kings Canyon. Who said that? There's an A. Kings Canyon. Between 1913 and 1928, the Lincoln Highway route out of Carson City to the west went up Kings Canyon, up to Spooner Summit. Okay? And when Henry C. Osterman died, he was one of the principals in the Lincoln Highway Association. He died in Jackson, Iowa. The Ormsby County Commissioners, that's what Carson City was before it was, Ormsby before it was Carson City. when they combined the two into one jurisdiction in 1969. Okay, in 1922, an honor of Henry C. Osterman, they called that grade of Kings Canyon Osterman grade. Okay, what happened? In 1928, the Nevada Department of Highways decided to relocate that portion of Lincoln Highway. Where did it go? Clear Creek. Clear Creek. That stretched down there in Clear Creek, right? And there used to be a camp up there farther, those who've gone up Clear Creek, and then it made it up to Spooner. In 1957, that's when the route that you take today was constructed. That was 57. Governor Charles Russell dedicated it. And one of the principal reasons it was built, does anybody know why they improved that highway in the way that they did? What was going to happen at the lake? Squaw Valley Winter Olympics. It was one of the improvements. It had been awarded. There were a number of improvements at the airport in Reno. There were a number of highway improvements. They were trying to accelerate the construction of I-80. They did not complete it in time. But all of that was a component part of getting ready for the Squaw Valley Winter Olympics in February 1960. Anybody know who opened those Olympics? Anybody remember? Vice President Richard Nixon and Pat Nixon. Yes.
Just a couple of follow-up points on that Army convoy.
Yeah, the 1919 Army convoy.
It will be memorialized along the Carson City bypass. At one of the exits, they are going to have some diagrams and steel of a truck and a stunt from guys pushing it out.
Thank you.
And one other thing was that Eisenhower was so appalled by the, after he made it all the way across the country,
right.
He was so appalled by the condition of the roads.
That inspired
Had a lot to do with
the 1956 congressional legislation with the Defense Highway bill that set up our interstate system. Thank you for mentioning that. I was a consultant to the Department of Transportation and the group, and they're saying, well, what can we do that, capture the history and be with the highway? I says, have you ever seen the Dwight Eisenhower film? And have you seen the photos they had? So I inspired them to say, let's recognize Dwight Eisenhower and his contribution to our highway system and the interstate system. And if you hadn't brought that up, I'd have forgotten it.
Each part of the freeway will,
Well, it's going to be in that final, they're working on the segment right now from Fairview to Spooner Junction. Okay, there are going to be lots of different improvements on that are aesthetic. You're going to see that. They're still putting some things on the central component, but as I remember correctly,
Mines.
what's that?
Mining.
Oh yeah, these are the other component parts, but you wanted to know what segment. And I'm thinking it might be the three segments, and I think it's going to be the third one. Well, I'll put it this way. Virtually all the infrastructure is in place, and what they need to do is lay down the highway. All they need is the money. We want you all to go home now.